Voting is the way ordinary citizens express their political power, influence government decisions, and shape the future of the country. But to understand voting today, how it works, who can vote, and why it matters, we have to understand the long history behind it. The story of voting in America is a story of expansion and struggle, of conflict and reform, of ordinary people, social movements, interest groups, and political leaders working for generations to extend the promise of democracy to more and more people. When the United States was founded, voting was extremely limited. In most states, only white male property owners could vote. This meant that only around 6% had any political voice. Early political leaders believed that only those with property had a true stake in society and were therefore the only ones trustworthy enough to participate in politics. But that narrow view didn't last long. The early 1800s brought changes as the country expanded westward. Frontier states wanted to attract settlers, so they offered broader voting rights without property requirements. Populist ideas grew, and political leaders like Andrew Jackson championed the inclusion of the common man. By the 1850s, most white men could vote regardless of property ownership, representing the first major expansion of voting rights. This expansion still excluded everyone else. African Americans, women, Native Americans, and the poor were still largely shut out of the democratic process. The Civil War created an opening for the next major shift. After emancipation, Black men in the South began voting in large numbers and even holding office. This newfound political power threatened those who had long dominated Southern politics. The 15th prohibiting states from denying the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It was a monumental step, but it was not self-enforcing. Southern states quickly found ways to suppress Black voters. Literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and white-only primaries were all designed to keep African Americans from voting. Violent intimidation, often carried out by groups like the Ku Klux Klan, reinforced these barriers. Despite this oppression, Black communities fought back. Interest groups like the NAACP, founded in 1909, began challenging discriminatory practices through the courts. Black newspapers, churches, and civic organizations mobilized voters and brought national attention to voter suppression. These early battles set the stage for victories that would not fully arrive until the mid-20th century. Another major milestone in the fight for voting rights came from the women's suffrage movement. Women had been organizing for political equality since the mid-1800s. Leaders like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Sojourner Truth argued not only for political rights, but for broader social equality. As the movement grew, groups like the National American Woman Suffrage Association and the National Woman's Party used marches, lobbying, civil disobedience, and media campaigns to pressure lawmakers. During World War I, women's contributions to the war effort shifted public opinion. President Woodrow Wilson, initially hesitant, eventually endorsed women's suffrage. After decades of activism, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, granting women nationwide the right to vote. Other groups continued to face challenges. Native Americans were not automatically considered U.S. citizens until the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, but even then, many states resisted allowing them to vote. Some states argued that Native Americans living on reservations weren't truly residents. It wasn't until the 1950s and 1960s, nearly 40 years later, that Native Americans secured consistent access to their right to vote. The mid-20th century brought the most dramatic expansion of voting rights since Reconstruction. For decades, African Americans in the South had been denied meaningful access to the ballot. Civil rights organizations fought tirelessly to challenge Jim Crow laws. Grassroots movements, freedom rides, sit-ins, lawsuits, and voter registration drives built momentum. The turning point came with events like Freedom Summer in 1964 and the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, where peaceful marchers were brutally attacked. These events shocked the nation. Television images of state troopers beating unarmed protesters created overwhelming public pressure for federal action. In response, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which became one of the most important civil rights laws in American history. The act banned literacy tests, provided federal oversight for states with histories of discrimination, and empowered the federal government to protect minority voters. Almost immediately, voter registration among African Americans increased dramatically across the South. The law was strengthened through amendments. They expanded protections to Spanish speakers, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Alaskan Natives, requiring bilingual ballots and language assistance in many areas. The Vietnam War brought yet another shift in voting rights. Young people argued that if they were old enough to be drafted, they should be old enough to vote. Protests, student activism, and pressure from youth organizations pushed the issue to the forefront. In 1971, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. President Richard Nixon supported the change, and it passed with overwhelming bipartisan approval. New laws continue to refine and improve access to the voting system. The National Voter Registration Act of 1993, often called the Motor Voter Act, required states to offer voter registration at DMVs and public assistance offices, making registration more accessible. The Help America Vote Act of 2002, passed after the disputed 2000 presidential election, modernized voting equipment, improved accessibility for voters with disabilities, and created national standards for provisional ballots and voter identification. Despite these expansions, voting rights have continued to be shaped by ongoing political conflict. In 2013, the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder struck down the formula used to determine which states required federal approval before changing their voting laws. This effectively weakened the Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance protections. Almost immediately, states such as Texas, Georgia, and Alabama implemented strict voter ID laws and other measures that disproportionately affected minority, elderly, and low-income voters. Interest groups like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the ACLU challenged many of these laws, while groups like the Heritage Foundation and various state legislatures defended them, arguing they were necessary to prevent fraud. Studies show that voter fraud is exceedingly rare, but the debate continues to shape policies across the nation. Modern voting laws have become part of a larger battle between expanding access and restricting it. Many states now offer automatic voter registration, same-day registration, universal mail-in voting, and expanded early voting. States like Colorado, Oregon, Washington, California, and Vermont have adopted systems that make voting easier and more accessible. Other states have focused on tightening rules, reducing early voting windows, limiting drop-off locations for mail ballots, or implementing stricter identification requirements. These debates are often polarized along party lines and are influenced by public opinion, interest group advocacy, and the strategies of political leaders. Understanding how people vote is just as important as understanding who can vote. Voter turnout varies dramatically across demographic groups. Older voters consistently turn out in higher numbers, while younger voters tend to vote less often. Education levels and income correlate strongly with participation, and race and ethnicity also shape voting patterns due to historical inequalities and present-day barriers. Partisanship plays a major role in driving voter behavior. Once someone identifies with a political party, they tend to stick with it and vote consistently in that direction. Today's voting system includes multiple ways to cast a ballot. Citizens can vote directly for candidates or issues, participate in primaries to help select party nominees, or vote through absentee or early voting options. Primary systems vary significantly across the states. Some use closed primaries, where only registered party members can vote. Others use open or semi-closed primaries that welcome independent voters. These rules affect who participates and how candidates are chosen. General elections determine who will hold office, and midterm elections, held halfway through a presidential term, often serve as a referendum on the president's party. Historically, the president's party loses seats in midterms, and these elections can dramatically shift the balance of power in Congress, influencing national policy for years. The Electoral College adds another layer of complexity to presidential elections. Rather than electing the president directly, voters choose electors who then cast the official votes. Most states use a winner-take-all system, meaning that even a narrow victory can secure all of a state's electoral votes. This system has been debated for centuries, with critics arguing it can distort the popular will, while supporters claim it protects smaller states and reinforces federalism. The voting process doesn't end when ballots are cast. Votes must be counted, verified, and certified. Election officials follow strict procedures to ensure accuracy, using electronic systems, paper ballots, audits, and recounts when necessary. Certification confirms the legitimacy of the results and ensures that the democratic process is upheld. Even today, challenges to voting persist. Voter suppression, whether through restrictive laws, polling place closures, aggressive voter roll purges, or limits on mail-in voting, continues to affect certain groups more than others. In states like Texas, strict voter ID laws and reduced polling locations in minority communities have become central issues in voting rights debates. Meanwhile, a growing threat to democratic participation comes from misinformation. False claims about voter fraud, mail-in ballots, or election procedures can confuse voters and undermine trust in the democratic process. Combating misinformation requires cooperation from government agencies, social media platforms, educators, and community organizations to help citizens identify reliable sources and understand the voting process clearly. At its core, voting is about shaping the direction of the country. The policies that determine education, healthcare, taxes, public safety, civil rights, and the economy all trace back to elected officials, and those officials are chosen by voters. The ongoing evolution of voting rights reflects the struggle between exclusion and inclusion, between limiting participation and expanding it. Every amendment, every court case, every protest, and every movement has contributed to expanding the power of the ballot to more people. Voting is the most powerful tool citizens have to shape their government, protect their rights, and create the future they want to see.